The Central War Council chamber shimmered with the cold brilliance of 1,000 alien lights. Each flicker bounced off the polished obsidian walls like distant, captive stars. Supreme Commander Veilshroud stood at the edge of the chamber balcony, his 4 eyes narrowing as he observed the representatives of a dozen empires. Each species was more bizarre than the last. Tentacles, wings, carapaces, and bioluminescent skin were all arrayed in a mockery of unity, their voices rising and falling in waves of derision. "Humans," hissed one of the winged delegates, his voice a brittle song of contempt. "One ship, one measly vessel, sent to a war that spans light years. Do they think this is enough?" Veilshroud kept silent, letting the chatter wash over him. He had studied humans for decades, at least from their intercepted communications and footage from first contact. Their behavior had always been chaotic, unpredictable, a species governed more by will than by cold logic. And yet, a small, stubborn spark had persisted, even after centuries of galactic indifference. "They mock us," he whispered to himself, his mandibles clicking softly in contemplation. And yet, there is something beneath it, something dangerous. Across the chamber, a 4-limbed reptilian delegate stomped on the floor, shaking the very platform with each strike. "They are arrogant. To send a single ship when the enemy fields hundreds. The Council will remember this folly." A chorus of hisses, clicks, and warbles of agreement rippled through the room. Veilshroud allowed a faint smirk. He had been to too many councils to believe in the finality of consensus. The strong always underestimated the weak, until it was too late. Then the transmission came. A single human voice, calm and measured, echoed across the chamber. "I am Admiral Elias Kane of the United Earth Navy. Our contribution to this alliance is one ship, one vessel capable of turning the tide." Veilshroud's antennas twitched. There was no tremor in the human's tone, no plea, no attempt to impress or exaggerate. Only certainty. The chamber erupted, tentacles flailed, wings beat with thunderous sound, and voices rose in derision. "One ship?" another delegate shrieked. "Do they mock us with such absurdity?" Veilshroud leaned forward, his gaze narrowing. Even from this distance he could feel the human confidence radiating through the comm feed like a pulse of light through shadow. There was no malice, no desperation, only a quiet assertion that they would act as if the universe itself depended on their will. And perhaps, in some distant, unseen way, it did. The Council spent the next hour debating, not over strategy, but over whether humanity should even be allowed to participate. Many argued that their contribution was laughable, a mere token. Some suggested they be ignored entirely. Others, more cautious, warned that humans were unpredictable, and unpredictable often meant dangerous. Veilshroud's mind wandered. He had witnessed countless species rise and fall by the arrogance of numbers alone. Strength in fleets was a tangible metric, yes, but courage, ingenuity, and audacity, those were far less predictable. And in his experience, the unpredictable was often the deadliest element in war. The transmission continued, displaying schematics of the ship they called the Invictus. Veilshroud's eyes widened, his limbs stiffening against the railing. The Invictus was no ordinary vessel. Its design was archaic, almost brutal in its simplicity, yet every line and curve spoke of efficiency and destructive potential. This was a weapon born of desperation, tempered by intellect, and infused with raw human audacity. "What is this?" hissed a crustacean delegate, his voice a grinding rasp. "A weapon of mass destruction? From humans?" "Yes," Veilshroud muttered under his breath. "From a species they themselves call primitive. From a species we all assumed had no place in this war. The humans did not defend themselves with rhetoric or flattery. They simply transmitted the specifications, detailing its firepower, shields, and maneuverability. Every number seemed impossibly precise, almost defying the laws of known physics. It was a ship built not only to survive, but to dominate." In the chamber, the mood shifted from mockery to unease. Aliens who had laughed just a moment ago now leaned forward, studying the schematics with wary suspicion. A silence fell, tense, expectant, Electric. Veilshroud felt a strange thrill, a familiar sensation he hadn't experienced since the last Great War decades ago. He realized with chilling clarity that humanity had already turned the first page of the Council's book of misjudgments, and they were just beginning. He remembered the briefings. Humans, when cornered, were inventive to the point of madness. They did not yield. They did not calculate only in numbers. They calculated in resolve, in courage, in faith, quiet, unspoken, and absolute. There was a certain divinity in that recklessness, a hint of something greater than themselves guiding their steps. "Commander Veilshroud," hissed a delegate from the crystalline world of Thriss. "Do you not agree? One ship cannot change the outcome. We have numbers, strategy, and firepower. They have audacity alone." Veilshroud's mandibles clicked thoughtfully. "Audacity is the root of survival," he replied slowly, "and humans have an abundance of it. Underestimate them at your peril." The chamber erupted again, but Veilshroud's attention had drifted. He could see it, the faint outline of the human vessel in its transit path, crossing the void like a dagger of light aimed at the heart of complacency. There was something poetic in its singularity, something terrifying. The Council had laughed at one ship, yet they would soon see that not all ships were equal, and not all strength lay in numbers. The alien delegates continued their bickering, unaware that Veilshroud's mind had already begun calculating probabilities, predicting outcomes. Even with their advanced computational systems, no empire had accounted for the wild card: humanity's will. Somewhere, in a quiet corner of the chamber, Veilshroud felt a subtle pulse, almost imperceptible, a reminder that chaos and order were intertwined. He did not call it divine, not yet, but he couldn't deny the sense of inevitability that hung around the human vessel. "They called it madness," he whispered to himself, echoing a sentiment he had encountered countless times in his study of humans. "They called it impossible. The humans call it Monday." Veilshroud turned away from the balcony, his gaze lingering on the stars beyond the chamber's transparent panels. Somewhere out there, in the void between galaxies, humanity's solitary ship moved with unwavering purpose, and for the first time in the history of the Central War Council, he felt a thrill of fear and awe. A delegate screeched, breaking the moment, but Veilshroud hardly noticed. He had already begun the calculations, the predictions, the possibilities. The humans had made their move, and now the universe would respond. He clenched his fists, feeling the tension coil in his limbs. The Council might laugh, sneer, and deride, but Veilshroud knew what was coming. He had seen this pattern before. A small underestimated force rises in a single impossible strike, shattering expectation and rewriting history. And somewhere in the dark, a human, perhaps Admiral Kane himself, looked out at the stars and said a silent prayer. Veilshroud felt it, subtle, quiet, and almost invisible, but he knew. Someone, somewhere, had orchestrated this. Not luck, not chance, something greater. The Council laughed, still unaware, but Veilshroud's voice, soft yet firm, cut through the din. "Let them watch closely. Humanity arrives, and the first laugh will be their last." The void was deeper than the Council could imagine. A black, infinite canvas punctuated only by distant stars and the drifting debris of civilizations long forgotten. Within this emptiness, the Invictus cut a solitary path, its hull glinting with a muted silver that seemed almost alive, absorbing and reflecting the cold starlight. Captain Elias Kane stood on the bridge, a quiet authority that needed no proclamation. His hands hovered over the control panel, not because the ship demanded them, but because he felt the pulse of the vessel beneath his fingers. Invictus. It was more than a machine. It was humanity's will incarnate. Every single meter of its length spoke of necessity, of sacrifice, of ingenuity that had been honed in the fiery crucible of Earth's last great war. Approaching the nebula of Thriss, his navigator reported, his voice remarkably steady despite the tension that hummed through the bridge like a live wire. Sensors picking up the Council fleets. hundreds of ships converging. Kane nodded, his eyes narrowing to sharp points of focus. He stared into the holographic display, watching the swarm of red icons blossom in the darkness ahead. "Let them come," he said, his voice low and firm. As if on cue, a chorus of alien warships emerged from hyperspace, appearing like a pack of predators that had finally scented their lone prey. There were tentacled dreadnoughts, bristling with ion cannons that pulsed with malevolent energy. Bioluminescent cruisers, sleek and agile, darted between the larger vessels, their forms glowing with an eerie, lethal light. And then there were the massive crystalline battleships, their faceted hulls seemingly impervious to any conventional artillery. Each ship bore the insignia of empires that had scoffed at humanity's audacity mere weeks ago. They had called humanity a fleeting nuisance, a minor species punching far above its weight. Now they were here to swat that nuisance out of existence. The bridge crew, a small, hand-picked cadre of humans trained for this singular purpose, moved with a calm, almost unnerving precision. They were the best of the best, forged in simulators and real-world skirmishes. Lieutenant Mira Santos, her fingers flying across her console, adjusted the targeting array. "They're focusing their scans, Captain," she reported, her voice tight. "They know Invictus is unique. They're cautious." Kane allowed a faint, humorless smirk to touch his lips. Cautious? Good. Fear is the first crack in any empire's foundation. He knew what they saw, a single human vessel, dwarfed by their armada. It should have been an easy kill, a footnote in their galactic history, but something held them back. The ship's design, its energy signature, its very presence here, defied all their known tactical doctrines. Meanwhile, light years away, Veilshroud, a senior member of the Central War Council, observed the scene from his command chamber through an array of sophisticated sensors and projection feeds. His four eyes, dark and analytical, studied the Invictus as if he were trying to dissect a living puzzle. No other species had ever dared to send a single ship into the heart of a declared war zone, not because it was impossible, but because it was utterly reckless, suicidal. Yet here it sailed, as if the void itself had cleared a path for it, as if it belonged in the eye of the storm. "It is audacious," Veilshroud murmured, his voice a low, gravelly hum of fascination. He had reviewed the intelligence reports on humanity, a young species, prone to conflict, but possessing a frighteningly rapid rate of technological and tactical evolution. "They do not fear. They do not hesitate," he noted to his aides. It wasn't bravery he was seeing. It was something else, something he couldn't quite label. But the humans aboard the Invictus were not fearless. Kane felt the immense weight of responsibility press down against his chest, a heavy, almost tangible force. Every life aboard this ship, every crew member who had placed their faith in him, was entrusted to his judgment. He saw their faces in his mind. Santos, his brilliant tactician, the young navigator, barely out of the academy, the veteran engineers deep in the ship's core keeping its heart beating. He could not fail them. He would not. Suddenly, the proximity alarms blared, a shrill cry that cut through the bridge's quiet tension. A squadron of Thrissian assault fighters had appeared, detaching from their mothership and cutting through the void like streaks of liquid light. Their weapons hummed and brilliant energy began arcing across the distance, painting the darkness with deadly strokes. Kane's hand rested on the command console, a steady point in the rising chaos. Evasive maneuvers. Pattern Delta 7. The crew responded instantly, their actions a symphony of trained instinct. Thrusters fired in short, powerful bursts, and the massive Invictus twisted in the vacuum with an impossible, balletic precision. Pulses of pure laser energy streaked past, missing the hull by mere meters, their lethal light illuminating the bridge for a split second before vanishing into the abyss. Kane's mind raced, a whirlwind of calculations, angles, timing, and probabilities. It was a dance of logic and intuition, the human element that no alien computer could ever fully predict. Lieutenant Santos exhaled sharply, her eyes glued to her screen. "They're adjusting, sir. Recalibrating." They're synchronizing for a broadside attack from the main fleet. Kane nodded, his expression unreadable. Then we give them nothing they expect. Just as he spoke, a sudden deep vibration ran through the entire ship. It wasn't a tremor from an impact, not a shockwave. It was something subtler, almost imperceptible, like the deep hum of a colossal tuning fork. Kane's eyes flicked to the main sensor display. A massive, unknown energy signature had just appeared on the very edge of the nebula, a ghost that the Council-S fleets had not detected until it was right on top of them. In his chamber, Veilshroud stiffened. His chitinous mandibles clicked together involuntarily, a sign of shock he hadn't displayed in centuries. "Impossible," he muttered, leaning closer to his projection feed. This wasn't part of any scenario his strategists had predicted. The humans called it audacity. But in that moment, Veilshroud recognized it as something more profound. It was the terrifying confidence of a species that refused to be measured by simple metrics, by the size of its fleet, or by the cold calculus of fear. Back on the bridge of the Invictus, Kane gave the order that would echo through galactic history. "Charge the primary cannon, target the center of their formation." The crew hesitated for barely a heartbeat. The shot was strategically insane. A single cannon blast against hundreds of shielded warships. It would be a suicidal display of raw defiance rather than a sound tactical move. But their hesitation vanished as they looked at their captain. They trusted Kane. They trusted this ship. They trusted humanity's long and bloody legacy of turning the impossible into just another Tuesday. Deep within the Invictus, the main cannon hummed to life. Energy, drawn from the ship's experimental core, coalesced into a focused, swirling column of light, a blinding shaft of potential destruction unlike anything this galaxy had ever witnessed. The aliens had numbers. They had superior shields. They had overwhelming speed. But the humans had ingenuity and a stubborn, glorious defiance that no algorithm, no matter how advanced, could ever hope to predict. The first volley from the Thrissian fighters streaked toward the Invictus. Kane's hand hovered over the control console. The ship responded to his silent command, twisting and pivoting in perfect, fluid synchronization with his thoughts. Beams of pure energy passed harmlessly, snapping across empty space, leaving no trace on the ship's silver hull. The enemy thought they were fighting a machine. They were fighting a man, and every soul aboard who followed him. "Now," Kane whispered, his voice barely audible above the rising thrum of the cannon. He brought his hand down. The cannon fired. The blast tore through the nebula, a ribbon of blinding, incandescent light that cut through the enemy formation like a surgeon's scalpel. Shields flared, overloaded, and then failed. Hulls buckled. Alien warships, which had seemed so invincible moments before, screamed in silent metallic agony as they were ripped apart. The Council fleet for the first time knew fear. And the Invictus, solitary and defiant, stood its ground in the heart of the storm. The Council chamber watched in stunned silence. A dozen of their finest vessels obliterated, gone before they even knew they were under attack. The Grand Observer, Veilshroud, felt his four eyes widen, a rare flicker of fear and awe intertwining within him. "One ship," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the hum of the observation deck. Just one ship. And yet, he had underestimated humanity, grossly. It wasn't their weapons, impressive as they were. It wasn't their tactical skill, which was proving to be unnervingly brilliant. No, it was something deeper, something Veilshroud and the entire Thrissian Empire had failed to account for in their exhaustive calculations. It was their courage, their raw, untamed audacity, their absolute stubborn refusal to yield, even when faced with the crushing enormity of the challenge before them. On the bridge of a Thrissian battlecruiser, a commander, his crystalline body already splintering under the relentless human assault, roared in disbelief into his comms. This is impossible. One vessel cannot possibly." His transmission was cut short, replaced by a calm, resolute human voice that sliced through the chaos of the interfleet communications feed. It was Captain Kane of the human ship, the Invictus. One ship does not equal one outcome, Kane stated, his voice a blade of steel. One ship equals one human will, and that is more than enough. Veilshroud watched mesmerized as the human crew moved. They weren't just a crew, they were a single unified organism. They executed maneuvers that defied all logic, a breathtaking dance that combined the raw, unpredictable chaos of instinct with the cold, hard precision of strategy. Every shot fired, every evasive twist, every single calculated risk was a testament to the very essence of their species. Humans don't just survive, they adapt, they innovate, and most terrifyingly of all, they defy. Veilshroud's mind raced, his four eyes darting across the holoscreens, recording every movement, every calculation, every impossible maneuver. He understood now. Humanity could never be quantified. They could never be truly predicted. They were a wild variable in the grand equation of the galaxy, driven by something the Thrissians had long since bred out of themselves: courage, creativity, and a stubborn, unwavering faith in something beyond logic, beyond themselves. It was a force Veilshroud could sense, a palpable energy radiating from that lone ship, but he could not name it. And yet, the humans were not fearless automatons. Kane glanced across his bridge, seeing the strain etched deep into the faces of his crew. He saw the weight of responsibility pressing down on them like the gravity of a collapsed star. They were afraid, yes. He could feel it in the air, a low hum of tension beneath the frantic activity. But for them, fear was never a weakness. It was a catalyst. It was the fuel that made them sharper, faster, more terrifyingly alive than any other species he had ever encountered. Somewhere in the controlled chaos of the Invictus's engineering bay, a young technician whispered a quiet prayer, a plea sent out into the void, almost lost amidst the clamor of battle. "Just keep us alive." Kane caught it, a faint whisper over the internal comms. He recognized the tone, not one of begging but one of defiance mingled with faith. He didn't speak, but he felt it too. A subtle awareness, a sense of unseen guidance, as if the universe itself was an intelligence, woven into the very fabric of existence. Humans did not command it. They didn't try to. They simply trusted it. And somehow, in ways that defied all probability, it responded, subtly, almost imperceptibly, aligning the impossible into fleeting, precious moments of survival. Veilshroud observed in utter silence. Every prediction he had made was shattered. Every probability simulation was now utterly meaningless. The Invictus continued its deadly ballet, weaving through the heart of the Thrissian fleet, leaving a trail of devastation and confusion in its wake. The mocking laughter that had filled the council chambers just moments ago had long since died, replaced by stunned, incredulous murmurs. They thought one ship could not change anything. Veilshroud murmured to himself, a new understanding dawning. And yet, as if to answer his thought, a new, far greater threat emerged from the alien armada. A massive Thrissian cruiser, a true behemoth of a warship, moved to intercept the Invictus. It activated a vast energy shield, creating a protective bubble around the smaller, more agile vessels in its formation. Its primary weapons began to charge, pulsing with a terrifying, destructive potential that promised to finally end this insane human defiance. The humans' next and perhaps final challenge awaited. On the bridge of the Invictus, Kane's hand rested lightly on the command console. His eyes narrowed, his mind a whirlwind of calculation as he assessed the cruiser's angle, its shield harmonics, the flux of its energy charge. He spoke two words, not just to his crew, but to the universe itself. "We adapt." Then he added the core of their creed, the promise they made to each other with every breath. "We survive, we fight." And in that precise moment, Veilshroud finally realized the truth. Humanity did not merely engage in war. They engaged in creation, the creation of possibility where none existed, the creation of courage in the face of oblivion, the creation of defiance against the inevitable. They were not just fighting. They were reshaping the very battlefield with nothing but the sheer force of their collective will. Across the void, in the opulent council chambers of the Thrissian Empire, the delegates were frozen, their crystalline forms reflecting the carnage on the viewscreen. No calculation, no war game, no strategic simulation could ever have prepared them for the raw power of the human mind at work in the field, or the unyielding spirit of the human heart guiding every single maneuver. Kane gave the order. The Invictus shifted, repositioning itself with a speed and grace that seemed impossible for a vessel of its size. The main cannon, which had already wrought so much destruction, began to charge once more. A single, focused point of incandescent energy aimed directly at the heart of the massive enemy cruiser. The blast fired, a brilliant streak of pure energy that cut through the blackness of the void, slamming into the enemy flagship with catastrophic surgical precision. A wave of silent light washed over the battlefield, then silence. Not a sound, for sound cannot travel in a vacuum. But this was a silence heavy with the weight of comprehension, a silence that echoed through the minds of every Thrissian who bore witness. The invaders had underestimated the humans. And now the price of that fatal miscalculation was written in blazing fire and scattered debris across the cold, unforgiving canvas of space. Veilshroud leaned against the observation panel, the only sound the soft, rhythmic clicking of his mandibles. "One ship," he repeated, his voice now low and reverent. "One human ship. And they bend the universe itself to their will." Back on the Invictus's bridge, the same quiet voice from engineering whispered again, almost lost in the aftermath. It was a soft, simple prayer of gratitude. Kane felt it, that subtle, comforting presence of something unseen that had guided them through the storm. He didn't call it divine, he didn't try to name it. He only knew that they had survived. Not through luck, not through chance, but through sheer, unyielding will, through faith, through something bigger and older than themselves. The Invictus moved onward, a lone sentinel of defiance, leaving the shattered remnants of the once mighty enemy fleet behind. And somewhere, in the endless silent darkness, a human voice spoke softly to the stars, a question hanging in the void. This can't just be an accident. The observation deck of the alien council hummed with a tension you could almost touch. Veilshroud, a being of immense intellect and 4 piercing eyes, tracked the human ship, the Invictus, as it sliced through the battlefield. The space around it was a graveyard of twisted metal and shattered hopes, yet the Invictus moved like a predator, agile and alive. Every turn, every burst of its engines, spat in the face of physics. The Council's most sophisticated simulation screamed impossible, yet there it was, executing maneuvers that shouldn't exist. "How?" A Thrissian delegate hissed, his crystalline body trembling. "Our models. They are failing us." Veilshroud remained silent. He wasn't just watching the ship, he was watching its crew. He noticed the subtle things, the details everyone else missed. A captain's hand twitching almost imperceptibly, a lieutenant holding her breath for a fraction too long, the fleeting glance between them as they coordinated a move that should have been suicide but instead was a stroke of genius. He saw it then. Humans weren't just chaotic, they were chaos refined into an art form. Their unpredictability wasn't random, it had a rhythm, a hidden pattern, and beneath it all, a terrifying, unyielding resolve. Aboard the Invictus, Captain Kane saw the battlefield not as chaos, but as a chessboard. His mind, sharpened by years of war on Earth and the scattered conflicts across the galaxy, saw patterns where others saw only noise. The enemy fleet moved with predictable precision, relying on overwhelming numbers and textbook formations. But humans didn't play by the book. They wrote their own. "They're forming a wedge," Lieutenant Santos reported, her fingers flying across the navigation console. "Standard Thrissian tactic. They're trying to box us in." Kane's gaze flickered to the tactical display. The wedge was a beautiful, deadly thing, a perfect trap. But it was built on one fatal assumption, that humans would react like any other species. They expect us to fight like them, Kane said, his voice a low hum. They're about to learn their first lesson. In an instant, the human crew moved as one. Engines flared, shields pulsed, and the Invictus didn't break the wedge. It slipped through it like water through a grasping hand. The ship's movements were fluid, organic, almost alive. Lasers from the alien ships seared through the empty space where the Invictus should have been, striking nothing but void. The humans had seen every move before it was made. Kane's voice cut through the quiet hum of the bridge, calm, but charged with authority. Prepare the forward cannons. Target the convergence point of their wedge. A series of affirmative beeps answered him. The cannon began to charge, its whine growing as it drew power directly from the ship's core. A collective breath was held. The plan was audacious, a high-wire act without a net. But this is what they had trained for. These moments where pure instinct, cold calculation, and raw courage became one. On the observation deck, Veilshroud leaned closer to the holographic display. The wedge was moments from collapsing on empty space. The odds against this single human ship were astronomical, a statistical impossibility, yet they moved with the certainty of fate itself. Something deeper than logic was at play. Then, the Invictus fired. A spear of blinding light tore through the very heart of the enemy formation. Ships at the tip of the wedge erupted in silent, blossoming fireballs, their perfect formation crumbling like a sandcastle against the tide. The council members flinched back in shock, muttering words that sounded like prayers, or perhaps curses. Aboard the Invictus, a young engineer, barely more than a kid, let out a shaky breath. Her hands were rock steady on her console. "It worked," she whispered, a note of pure disbelief in her voice. "It actually worked." Kane glanced at her, catching the faint tremor in her shoulders. "It always works," he replied. It wasn't arrogance. It was a statement of faith. Humans acted with courage because they had to. The only other option was to perish. Veilshroud watched the humans, a disquieting mix of awe and unease growing within him. Here was a species that defied measurement. Each move they made rewrote the rules of the battlefield. Every action was a gamble, yet every gamble paid off, guided by something more than just strategy. It was guided by conviction. The alien fleets scrambled to react, their commanders screaming orders in a frenzy of claws, tentacles, and crystalline appendages. But the humans were always one step ahead, adapting faster than thought. Every volley of lasers, every torpedo launch, was met with a counter that was as elegant as it was terrifying. It was as if the Invictus could read their minds. Veilshroud's antennae twitched. He recognized this pattern. He'd seen it in other species that defied cold logic, species that ran on pure intuition and willpower. In every single case, it had ended in disaster for those who had underestimated them. The Council had made a grave error, and yet he sensed something else, a quiet rhythm beneath the surface of their courage. Amidst the fear and the engineering, he felt a pulse. Something was guiding them, not through brute force but by opening the door to possibility. On the bridge of the Invictus, Kane felt it too. It wasn't an abstract theory. It was a whisper of certainty in his gut. A silent, unseen force that was aligning the improbable in their favor. It wasn't magic or luck. It was something more natural, as if the universe itself was bending just slightly in response to their sheer will. The battle raged on. Every strike from the humans was a scalpel, carving through the enemy lines and leaving the Council fleets in disarray. Alien commanders shouted in fury and disbelief, but the humans just would not break. "Damage report," Kane asked, his voice steady. "All minor, sir," Lieutenant Santos replied. "Hull integrity at 99%. Shields are stable. No casualties." Kane's jaw tightened, not in relief, but in renewed focus. This was far from over. This was just the beginning. But every victory, no matter how small, hardened their resolve. It was a constant reminder of what they could achieve when pushed past the brink. Veilshroud's eyes narrowed, tracking their impossible progress. For the first time, he truly doubted the Council's projections. He doubted their numbers. He doubted their certainty. You couldn't measure humanity with an algorithm. You couldn't contain their audacity in a spreadsheet. A Thrissian warlord's voice crackled through the chamber, trembling with dawning horror. We underestimated them. Veilshroud felt it again, that faint pulse in the back of his mind, a resonance he could no longer deny. The humans had faith, not just in their technology or in each other, but in something more. Something that guided the improbable and aligned the impossible. The Invictus pivoted, plunging into the very heart of the reeling enemy formation. The main cannon charged again, a single precise shot aimed at the largest cruiser in the fleet. The blast hit home, and the massive ship erupted in a silent supernova. The enemy formation didn't just break, it shattered. On the bridge, the crew exchanged brief, silent glances. In their eyes, you could see the shared truth. They were surviving against impossible odds. They were winning. And somewhere in the void, watching the cosmic ballet unfold, Veilshroud whispered to himself, his voice filled with a new, reverent understanding. One ship, one human ship, and yet it moves the cosmos. A soft, almost silent hum filled the bridge of the Invictus. It was the sound of inevitability. Kane didn't question it. He didn't try to name it. He simply acted, driven by the unshakable certainty that humanity's will was, in itself, a weapon. The alien fleets began to recoil. The first cracks of doubt were spreading through their ranks, turning into a flood of panic. Reports of destroyed ships and shattered formations filled their comms, and in the chaos they had created, the humans thrived. Veilshroud finally understood. The galaxy had never encountered anything like humanity. Firepower and strategy mattered, of course, but they were nothing against a species that wielded resolve, creativity, and courage in such terrifying abundance. Kane's hand rested on the console, his eyes sweeping the battlefield. He didn't need to shout orders. The crew moved with an instinct born of absolute trust and sheer will. A quiet voice whispered over the comms, soft and unassuming. "This isn't luck. Someone wanted us to survive." Kane felt it. That subtle presence, guiding, aligning, sustaining. He wouldn't call it God, but he understood the feeling. The humans believed, and the universe, in its own mysterious way, had responded. Veilshroud leaned forward, his four eyes wide, recording every single moment, every ripple of human audacity. Humanity was no longer a variable to be calculated. Humanity was a force to be reckoned with. The Invictus flew onward, a silver needle stitching a pattern of victory through the tattered fabric of the enemy fleet. The Council could only watch, horrified, as one ship defied all logic, all strategy, all reason. And they knew, with a chilling certainty, that this was only the beginning. The void ahead of the Invictus was no longer empty. It was a storm. Alien fleets converged, shimmering like lethal constellations, their formations coiling into predatory spirals. The Council had regrouped. They had learned from their last encounter, and now they had decided to test the humans, to crush them before their audacity became a legend. Captain Elias Kane stood at the helm, his eyes scanning the holographic battle map that filled the bridge. The numbers were staggering. 3 separate fleets, each larger than the last, converging on their position with terrifying speed. Yet, despite the impossible odds, a calm authority radiated from him. He was the nerve center of a storm built of steel, will, and unyielding courage. Lieutenant Santos leaned over the tactical console, her brow furrowed in concentration. "They're forming a pincer, Captain. If they succeed, we'll be trapped inside the Maelstrom Nebula. Our shields might hold for a while, but not for long." Kane's hand hovered above the command interface, a silent pause before the storm. "Then we deny them certainty," he said, his voice a low, steady anchor in the rising tension. "We force them to react, to adapt to us. Numbers do not win wars, Lieutenant. Resolve does." Behind him, the bridge crew moved with quiet precision. Every action was rehearsed, a symphony of skill, yet it was alive with improvisation. This was where humans thrived, in the chaotic dance of unpredictability, blending raw instinct with cold intellect. intuition with hard-won discipline. The aliens couldn't anticipate their moves because the humans didn't behave predictably. They behaved purposefully. Far away in the hallowed council chambers, Veilshroud observed the scene from his command station. He felt a familiar mixture of fascination and dread. He had watched countless civilizations rise and fall, each one believing their numbers, their firepower, and their flawless strategy made them untouchable. None of them had survived the human variable. They are still alive, hissed a crystalline delegate nearby, his voice trembling with disbelief. Against these odds, it's impossible. Veilshroud's mandibles clicked softly. Impossible, he murmured more to himself than to the delegate, is only a measure of expectation, not of reality. Back in the nebula, the human ship sailed into the maelstrom like a silver arrow shot from a bow of pure defiance. The enemy's first volleys struck the void, beams of searing energy snapping across the dark expanse. The Invictus shivered as its shields flared to life, absorbing the initial attacks with calculated grace. But Kane knew this was just the beginning. The Council had prepared a counterstrike designed to annihilate them in a single, overwhelming blow. Divert auxiliary power to the aft shields, Kane ordered, his voice cutting through the hum of the bridge. Evasive maneuvers. Vector 39 Mark Delta. The ship twisted with a fluidity that belied its immense mass, dodging the first coordinated strikes. Explosions lit up the swirling gases of the nebula, each silent blast throwing shimmering fragments of energy into the void. The humans worked in perfect synchrony, anticipating each new threat, adapting in real time. Commander Kane, Santos said, her voice tense but steady. Their central energy nexus is charging. If they release that pulse, it will tear through the nebula, and us with it. Kane's jaw tightened. This was it. The moment of decision. Then we strike first. He issued a series of orders that seemed reckless on paper but were perfectly rational in their audacious execution. The main cannon hummed, a single brilliant column of concentrated energy that sliced through the darkness. The targeting was precise, the strike timed with a near-impossible synchronization of the ship's thrusters, shields, and the enemy's own formation collapse. The blast erupted in a blinding cascade of light, striking the enemy's energy nexus just as it reached its peak charge. The resulting explosion was catastrophic. It threw massive shockwaves across the nebula, disabling dozens of enemy ships in a single, audacious move. The pincer formation faltered. The alien's first massive counterstrike had been turned against itself. Veilshroud's four eyes widened in astonishment. He had calculated probabilities for every conceivable human maneuver. He had run simulations on every possible combination of outcomes. And yet the humans had done the one thing he had not predicted. They had turned the enemy's own strategy against them, using sheer ingenuity and audacity as their primary weapons. Remarkable, he whispered. They do not fight like soldiers. They fight like the universe itself intended. On the bridge of the Invictus, the human crew allowed themselves a brief, collective exhale, but only a brief one. Kane's eyes were already back on the tactical display. The Council would not relent. They would not stop. They would send wave after wave, testing humanity until either the ship fell or the impossible became real. Prepare the secondary cannons, Kane said, his tone resolute. We will need precision strikes to hold the center line. And, his voice softened, almost imperceptibly, we pray we have more than skill on our side today. The crew exchanged knowing glances, catching the subtle acknowledgement of hope, faith, and courage woven together in their captain's words. Humans rarely prayed aloud in the heat of battle, yet they believed, not blindly, but in a quiet intelligence, a force beyond their reckoning. They had survived countless near-impossible odds on Earth, and somehow, that legacy of resilience had carried them into the stars. From his distant observation post, Veilshroud watched them silently, trying to understand what truly made humans different. Was it just their ingenuity, their courage, their stubborn refusal to die? Or was it something subtler, something he could sense? but not define. A pulse of purpose, of faith, of some unseen guidance threading its way through their every action. As the battle raged, a human technician, her face streaked with grime, muttered a soft prayer as she rerouted power to the secondary shields. "Keep us alive. Please." Kane heard her, but he did not respond. He didn't need to. He felt it too, that faint, almost imperceptible alignment of possibility, as if the universe itself was bending toward their will. Humans acted, and the universe responded. The alien fleets regrouped, firing in coordinated barrages designed to overwhelm and exhaust them. But the Invictus danced through the onslaught, its maneuvers impossible to predict, its strikes precise and devastatingly effective. Enemy ships disintegrated in silent, beautiful cascades of energy and fire. The Council's cold confidence faltered, replaced by a creeping, dawning fear. "One ship. One human ship," Veilshroud murmured, his analytical mind struggling to process what he was seeing. And yet it bends reality. The humans, despite their growing exhaustion, maintained their perfect synchronization. Each crew member knew their role intimately, yet acted with the freedom to improvise, to adapt, to outthink the enemy in real time. Their victories were not miracles. They were the hard-won product of relentless courage, limitless ingenuity, and unshakable belief. A massive Thrissian dreadnought lumbered forward, its powerful shields protecting smaller ships behind its bulk. Kane studied it, analyzing its speed, trajectory, and shield configuration. He felt that familiar thrill that always came with facing impossible odds. "Target the dreadnought's shield junction points," he ordered. "Use the secondary cannons. Coordinate with evasive thrusters. Every shot counts." The crew executed flawlessly. The dreadnought's shields flickered and faltered under the precise, relentless fire. Explosions tore along its hull, ripping it apart from the inside out. As the behemoth died, the smaller vessels scattered, panic spreading through the Council fleet like wildfire. Veilshroud's mind raced. He had never witnessed such precision, such coordination, such unshakable resolve. Humans were supposed to be fragile, erratic, and emotionally inferior. Yet here they were, turning impossibility into reality, shaping the battlefield with their audacity, and refusing to yield to either logic or fear. An engineer on the Invictus, his hair singed and sweat running down his face, whispered under his breath, "It's not luck. Someone wanted us to survive this." Kane caught the words, feeling the subtle resonance of that shared faith, that collective courage, that unseen guidance in their action. It wasn't divine intervention, not entirely, but it was something more than chance. It was something beyond measurement. Veilshroud leaned closer to his display, recording every movement, every maneuver, every decision. Humanity was not merely fighting a battle. They were rewriting the rules of engagement, proving that courage, ingenuity, and faith could overcome even the most overwhelming odds. The Invictus moved onward, slicing through the remnants of the enemy lines with unstoppable precision. The Council fleets reeled, their initial arrogance replaced by a profound sense of dread. Humanity's first true test among the stars had been met, and they had emerged victorious. Not because of luck, but because of their indomitable will, their endless creativity, and their unyielding resolve. The Invictus plunged deeper into the chaos, a lone silver blade cutting through a sea of alien fleets. Around them, the nebula's gases shimmered, casting eerie, shifting reflections across the hull, painting the ship with ephemeral patterns of light. Every flicker seemed like a warning. This was no ordinary battlefield. Every shadow hinted at a lurking danger, and yet the humans aboard moved with a rhythm that defied fear, a synchronized dance of purpose and resolve. At the helm, Captain Elias Kane stood unwavering, his eyes locked on the holographic display. Ahead loomed the enemy command center, a massive fortress-like dreadnought, its sheer size dwarfing the combined fleets that protected it. This was the nerve of the Council's power in this sector, the very heart of their strategy. It was the target that, if destroyed, could single-handedly turn the tide of the entire war. Lieutenant Santos's voice cut through the low hum of the bridge, tight with focus. Scans show layered shields, energy defenses, and automated turrets. A direct assault will be catastrophic, Captain. Kane's jaw tightened, a glint of defiance in his eyes. Then we don't assault. We adapt. We exploit. We survive. Observing from his station, Veilshroud felt a familiar sense of fascination. His four eyes narrowed, tracking every human movement. Humanity had proven impossible to predict so far, a chaotic variable in the rigid equations of galactic warfare. But he knew the real test was just beginning. All previous victories were just skirmishes, clever diversions, brilliant demonstrations of ingenuity. Now Kane was about to confront the nerve center itself. A ripple of tension spread through the bridge. The crew of the Invictus adjusted weapons, shields, and navigation systems in a symphony of preemptive anticipation. Every single member knew this engagement could very well be their last, yet they moved with a calm, practiced precision, their trust in their captain and their ship absolute. Enemy formation is tightening, Santos reported, her fingers flying across her console. They're concentrating fire on our forward vector. If we hold this line, we risk being completely surrounded. Kane nodded, his lips pressed into a thin line. Then we changed the line. The human ingenuity that had defined the Invictus's journey was about to manifest once again. Instead of meeting the enemy head-on, Kane ordered a sudden, audacious shift. He charted a vector that would thread the ship between two massive enemy cruisers, navigating a narrow, turbulent channel in the nebula that the Council fleets had assumed was impassable. The alien commanders recoiled, their rigid formations thrown into disarray by the sheer audacity of the maneuver. Shields flared as the Invictus dodged volley after volley of concentrated energy. Sparks of superheated plasma danced across the hull, yet the ship moved as if it had anticipated every strike seconds before it was even fired. Veilshroud leaned forward, his antennas quivering with a mixture of awe and deep unease. One ship, rewriting the rules of engagement. Again. On the bridge, Kane felt a familiar, subtle hum, a quiet alignment of improbable odds bending in their favor. He didn't call it divine intervention, he didn't need to. It was simply a presence, a guiding rhythm, subtle yet undeniable, threading through every move, every decision, every breath aboard the Invictus. Lieutenant Santos tapped a rapid sequence into the targeting array. Their shields are concentrated at the command core. If we can overload the outer layers and breach the secondary systems, we might. Kane held up a hand, cutting her off. Not might, Lieutenant. Will. We will breach. We will survive. We will succeed. The Invictus accelerated, weaving through the enemy lines with an impossible, almost liquid agility. Lasers streaked past, missing by mere meters, while torpedoes detonated harmlessly in the void, leaving only shimmering fragments in their wake. Every attack was a calculated risk, every maneuver a perfect combination of cold intuition and hard-won precision. The humans had turned fear into fuel and danger into opportunity. Veilshroud's mandibles clicked softly. He had anticipated human creativity, but he had never accounted for this seamless integration of instinct, intellect, and sheer will. Every single move Kane made disrupted the enemy's cold calculations, forcing them to react, to falter, to misstep. A massive cruiser attempted to flank the Invictus, trying to trap it in a deadly crossfire. Kane's hand hovered over the main console, his expression unreadable. Vector Omega, execute evasive twist, engage secondary cannons on port side. The ship responded instantly, twisting in the void like a living thing. Beams of energy grazed the hull, sparking violently across the surface, yet the humans emerged unscathed. Their own strikes found critical gaps in the cruiser's shields, tearing it apart from the inside out. A wave of panic rippled through the enemy formation. Veilshroud leaned even closer, his systems recording every single detail. The humans didn't merely fight. They orchestrated, they adapted, they imposed their will on a battlefield that was designed to overwhelm and destroy them. Kane's gaze shifted, locking onto the heart of the enemy command center. Its shields were formidable, layered with complex energy defenses, automated turrets, and redundant power systems. A direct assault would be suicidal, but Kane saw what the enemy's computers could not. patterns, rhythms, and weaknesses hidden within the raw data. "Prepare the main cannon," he ordered, his voice echoing with quiet authority. "Timing is critical. Focus on the energy nexus, then pivot for maximum disruption." The crew worked as one, every movement precise, every calculation instantaneous. They had practiced for this moment countless times, yet the real challenge was improvisation, the ability to adapt in real time to variables no one could fully predict. Veilshroud felt it too, the tension, the anticipation, the subtle rhythmic pulse of something beyond mere calculation. Humanity had survived impossible odds before. They had turned the unthinkable into reality, and now they faced their greatest challenge yet, the heart of the Council's power. The Invictus fired. A blinding bolt of energy tore through the nebula, striking the command center's shields with devastating precision. A ripple of pure force expanded outward, tearing through automated defenses and cracking the outer hull. The Council's flagship shuddered under the impact, alarms blaring across its massive, ornate bridge. Alien commanders shouted in disbelief, their voices a cacophony of shock and confusion. "Impossible! One ship! How can one vessel?" Kane's voice cut through their comm feed, a blade of cold steel. "Not luck, not numbers. Resolve, ingenuity, humanity." Aboard the Invictus, the crew braced as the ship's shields absorbed the inevitable backlash, energy flaring brightly across the forward viewport. But there were no casualties, no critical damage, only opportunity. Veilshroud's antennas twitched. In that moment, he realized something profound. Humans didn't merely fight battles. They reshaped reality itself with will, courage, and a type of faith he couldn't comprehend. Each action was precise, deliberate, and audacious, bending outcomes that seemed predetermined. A young technician muttered a quiet prayer under her breath. Kane caught the sentiment without needing to ask. "We are not alone," he said softly. His voice meant only for his crew, not in a divine sense perhaps, but in the certain knowledge that their courage aligned with forces larger than themselves, subtle yet ever present, guiding them through the impossible. The enemy command center staggered under the relentless assault. Smaller vessels scrambled to cover its wounded flank, but the Invictus anticipated every move. Kane's strategy was a breathtaking synthesis of prediction, instinct, and pure improvisation, a masterclass of human ingenuity at its peak. Veilshroud recorded it all, finally realizing that numbers and firepower were meaningless when faced with humanity's raw audacity. One ship, one crew, one captain, and an unyielding will had undone centuries of strategic dogma. The humans, exhausted but unbowed, prepared for the next phase, penetrating the inner defenses, confronting the nerve of the enemy fleet, and proving once more that courage, creativity, and faith were the most lethal weapons in their arsenal. The battle was far from over, but the tide was turning. The Invictus drifted at the edge of the enemy command center, a solitary silver spear poised against the nerve of the Council's fleet. The nebula's gases swirled around them, refracting alien lights into ghostly patterns across the hull. Every flash seemed to mock the humans with the specter of danger, yet the ship moved as if the void itself bent to its will. At the helm, Captain Elias Kane stood, eyes narrowed in focused determination. The command center loomed larger with every passing moment, its shields a complex lattice of energy and force fields, its automated defenses spinning like predatory gears. This was the culmination of centuries of alien military thought, a fortress designed to crush invaders, particularly a single ship acting alone. Lieutenant Santos's voice cut through the low hum of the bridge. "Forward shields are at 70%, Captain. Outer defenses are responsive. If we breach, the inner core will be heavily fortified. This is unprecedented." Kane's hands hovered lightly over the controls, a picture of calm resolve. "Then we do what humans do best, Lieutenant. We adapt, we improvise, we survive, and we strike where they least expect it." Observing from his station, the alien attaché, Veilshroud, could barely believe what he was witnessing. Every prediction his people had made, every probability, every calculated strategy, had been utterly nullified by the humans' relentless audacity. They didn't just conform to expectations, they shattered them and redefined the very concept. "They are not just surviving," he whispered, his mandibles clicking softly in astonishment. "They are shaping reality itself." On the bridge, the crew of the Invictus prepared for the first direct assault. Every system was aligned, every cannon charged, every thruster vector calculated, but not to the last decimal. That was the human way. They left room for intuition, for unpredictability, for the spark of genius that numbers could never capture. The first wave of automated turrets fired. Lasers streaked through the void like angry red claws. The Invictus's shields flared, absorbing the brutal impact, while the hull twisted in a dizzying ballet of evasive maneuvers. Each crew member reacted instinctively, a symphony of coordinated precision. Fear was present, yes, but for this crew, fear was fuel, not paralysis. Kane's voice rang out, clear and steady. "Primary cannon. Target the outer lattice at 4-8 mark. Brace for secondary discharge." The Invictus responded as one. The main cannon charged, its hum rising to a crescendo, before firing a beam of pure energy, a brilliant spear that pierced the nebula's gloom. It struck the energy lattice with devastating force. Shocks of light cascaded across the command center's outer defenses, disrupting shields, fracturing hull integrity, and sending automated drones spinning helplessly into the void. The first line of the fortress had been shattered. Veilshroud's antennae twitched. He had anticipated countless maneuvers, run thousands of simulations. None of them involved a move this audacious, this successful. The humans were rewriting the rules of engagement with every single heartbeat. "Secondary systems," Kane ordered, his voice cutting through the momentary awe. "Prepare precision strike on the junction nodes. Every shot counts. Timing is critical." The crew executed flawlessly. Torpedoes like silver needles threaded their way through impossibly narrow corridors of energy, striking junction points that even the most sophisticated alien calculations had deemed invulnerable. A chain reaction of explosions rippled through the command center, great cracks forming in its seemingly impenetrable exterior. Panic began to spread across the enemy fleets as they witnessed their pride, their nerve center, their symbol of invincibility, succumbing to a single human ship. Lieutenant Santos exhaled sharply, a sound of disbelief and triumph. "They didn't expect this. The core is exposed, sir, but their defenses are adapting. We have a narrow window." Kane's gaze hardened into diamonds. "Then we take it. Precision and audacity. Always audacity." The main cannon charged again. This time its firing sequence was synchronized with evasive thrusters, with rapid shield fluctuations, and with the ship's subtle, almost instinctive movements. It was less a calculated shot, and more a moment of pure, focused intent. The beam cut through space, striking the inner core of the command center with surgical precision. The explosion was colossal. It lit up the entire nebula, a new, violent star born in the darkness, sending shockwaves that battered the Council fleet. Smaller ships scattered, their shields flaring in panic, while larger vessels faltered, their command nexus suddenly and shockingly gone. Veilshroud leaned forward, a rare, unfamiliar chill running through his limbs. The humans had not just breached the fortress, they had unmade it. They had turned centuries of meticulous alien strategy into cosmic rubble. They cannot be contained," he whispered, his voice filled with a mixture of awe and dawning terror. "One ship, one human mind, and they redefine the entire battlefield." A quiet murmur rippled through the Invictus's crew. Some whispered prayers, others exhaled in sheer disbelief, yet all of them understood the magnitude of the moment. Humanity had just turned the impossible into reality. It wasn't through sheer numbers or overwhelming technological superiority. It was through courage, through creativity, and through an unyielding will that seemed to bend the very laws of probability toward success. Kane glanced at his crew, noting the tension etched on their faces, the deep fatigue in their eyes. Yet there was no hesitation, no doubt. They had trained for moments like this, of course. but no amount of training could account for the sheer audacity required to pull it off. This was instinct, experience, and faith, all fused into decisive action. Veilshroud watched silently, recording every detail, trying to comprehend what he had just seen. He understood the numbers, the physics, the probabilities, and yet none of his science could account for human audacity. Humans acted with a certainty that transcended calculation, a force born of creativity, courage, and the subtle, unspoken guidance of something greater than themselves. The enemy fleets recoiled, their perfect formations breaking apart, their command systems thrown into chaos. Arrogance was replaced by raw, unadulterated panic. For the first time in their long history, the Council understood a fundamental truth. Humanity could not be measured, predicted, or controlled. The Invictus had breached the heart of the enemy command center, but Kane knew this was only the beginning. The inner defenses remained formidable, and the core itself contained fail-safe systems capable of annihilating anything within a light-minute radius. Every move forward now required that same courage, that same ingenuity, and that faint whisper of faith that had carried them through impossible odds so far. A technician near the back of the bridge muttered softly, almost inaudibly, "Not luck. Someone wanted us to survive." Kane felt it too. He didn't need to name it. He didn't need to explain it. The humans had survived countless impossibilities, and now, in the smoldering shadow of the enemy's nerve center, they continued to move forward, guided by their audacity and an unseen alignment of fate and will. Veilshroud's eyes narrowed. He realized, with a profound sense of both awe and fear, that the humans were not just a force to be reckoned with. They were an idea made flesh. One ship, one crew, one captain, and the quiet, subtle presence of something beyond calculation had just reshaped the future of the galaxy. The Invictus pivoted, its form silhouetted against the fires of the dying command center, and entered the inner sanctum. Automated turrets swiveled to meet them. Energy barriers flared to life, and the threatening hum of alien machinery filled the void. The crew braced themselves. The humans had done the impossible before. They would do it again. The inner sanctum of the Council's command center was a deadly maze. Energy conduits crisscrossed like glowing veins, defensive turrets waited with silent menace, and computational nodes hummed with lethal precision. Every surface was cold, sterile, and reflected a terrifying order. Into this storm of technology drifted the Invictus, a lone silver blade threading the eye of a hurricane. On the bridge, Captain Elias Kane's hands rested lightly on the console. His mind was a blur of tactical calculations and pure instinct. One wrong move, one misjudged angle, and the ship would be shredded by energy discharges or trapped in containment fields. But the humans didn't hesitate. In this place, hesitation was death. Audacity was the only path to survival. Lieutenant Santos's voice cut through the tense hum. "Automated defense matrix detected, Captain. If they activate the core sequences, the blast radius could obliterate the Invictus and everything within 10,000 kilometers." Kane's gaze never wavered. "Then we act before they do. Precision, speed, and will." From the council chambers, the alien observer Veilshroud watched, his projections flickering. Never in millennia had a single ship penetrated so far, so fast. He'd seen audacity from humans before, but this was something else. This wasn't just recklessness. It was ingenuity fused with a terrifying courage. A piercing alarm suddenly blared across the bridge. The command center's final defenses were online. Laser grids coiled through the void like enormous serpents. Automated turrets spun into position and energy barriers rippled with lethal power. The Invictus shuddered as the first volleys struck its shields. Sparks danced across the hull, but the ship moved with an almost unnatural agility. Every maneuver was precise yet fluid, a deadly choreography of survival and defiance. "Evasive maneuvers Delta 9, Kane commanded. Secondary cannons, target turret arrays on port and starboard." The crew executed the orders flawlessly. This was where the human mind thrived, on the unpredictable edge of risk and creativity. Lasers ricocheted off the ship's hull as its cannons fired with unerring accuracy. Turrets exploded in cascading showers of molten metal. Still, the core defenses remained, pulsing with the quiet menace of calculated inevitability. Veilshroud's antennas twitched. He had run countless simulations, anticipated every logical outcome, yet the humans shattered each expectation with a single, relentless principle. They simply refused to die. Not because they couldn't, but because they wouldn't. "Captain," Santos said, her voice tinged with awe, "the core junction nodes are exposed, but only for a moment. Timing is critical. One misstep—" "I know," Kane replied, his eyes locked on the glowing energy nexus at the chamber's heart. "Then we strike like humans always do, with courage, precision, and belief." The Invictus pivoted, its engines flaring. Its shields pulsed in perfect sync with the thrusters and cannon fire. The main cannon began to charge, gathering a concentrated pulse of energy more powerful than anything the Council could have anticipated. This wasn't just a weapon born of technology. It was a weapon forged from human will, honed in the crucible of countless impossible challenges. Veilshroud whispered almost against his will, "They are an anomaly." Kane gave the final order. "Fire." The beam erupted. It cut through the inner defenses with a brilliance that lit up the entire nebula outside in stark, blinding white light. Energy barriers disintegrated. Turrets exploded in cascades of molten fragments. The core junctions fractured under a precise, unstoppable force. The nerve center of the Council fleet had been breached. On alien bridges across the fleet, commanders screamed in disbelief. Clawed and tentacled limbs thrashed as they tried to react, but their efforts were futile. One ship, one human will, had undone millennia of their power and planning. On the bridge of the Invictus, the crew allowed themselves a single, brief breath. They had survived, yes, but they had also reshaped the entire battlefield. In that moment, every crew member felt it, the pulse of something greater guiding them, a quiet alignment of possibility that seemed to favor their courage and ingenuity. Kane glanced at Lieutenant Santos. "We're not done. Precision strikes on the core now. Every shot must count." The secondary cannons fired in a symphony of destruction. Energy conduits overloaded, and cascading failures rippled through the command center. The alien nerve hub, once thought untouchable, shuddered under the relentless onslaught. Veilshroud's mandibles clicked in disbelief. He had studied war, probability, and strategy for centuries. But the humans were proving that the laws of expectation simply did not apply to them. Numbers, firepower, even advanced prediction, none of it could overcome this fusion of ingenuity, courage, and the subtle alignment of unseen forces that humanity seemed to carry with them. In the chaos, a young engineer on the Invictus whispered a quiet prayer. "Not luck. Someone wanted us to survive." Kane felt it too, that subtle resonance of faith and will that had guided them through every impossible obstacle. It wasn't magic or luck in any obvious sense, it was something quieter, something woven into the fabric of reality itself, something that bent to audacity and courage. The core systems of the Council's command center began to fail. Explosions ripped across the nexus and shockwaves tore through the inner chambers. Smaller alien vessels scattered in confusion. Panic replaced command. The once mighty fleet faltered, suddenly disorganized and vulnerable. Veilshroud leaned back, stunned, recording every last detail. He understood numbers. He understood physics. He understood strategy. But he did not understand humans. One ship, one crew, one captain had achieved the impossible. They had penetrated the enemy's heart and emerged not only intact, but victorious. The Invictus shifted, moving through the wreckage with careful precision. Every strike, every maneuver, every decision had been deliberate, yet executed with a fluid grace that was impossible to predict. The humans had transformed the battlefield, bending the enemy's own power back against them. Kane looked at his crew. Fatigue was etched on every face, but determination shone in every eye. "We're not just surviving," he said quietly. "We're proving something. We're showing the galaxy who we are." The humans had done more than breach a fortress. They had shattered arrogance and challenged expectation. They had redefined what a single ship, a single crew, and a single species could achieve. Veilshroud's antennas twitched again. He realized with a mixture of awe and fear that humanity was no longer just another player in the galaxy. They were a force beyond calculation, an idea given flesh, and an example that would echo across every world and every fleet for generations to come. The wreckage of the Council's command center floated in the void, a shattered jewel sparking against the nebula's ethereal glow. But even in ruin, the Council was not defeated. Alien commanders, some clawed, some tentacled, others formed of crystalline structures, moved with a desperate unified precision. They were consolidating the remnants of their fleets, preparing for one last, apocalyptic gambit. A weapon so massive, so indiscriminate, it could obliterate everything within a sector-wide radius. On the bridge of the Invictus, Captain Elias Kane stood at the helm, his eyes scanning the tactical displays. He saw not just chaos, but patterns woven from desperation. His crew was exhausted, their faces etched with the fatigue of a long, brutal war, but their resolve was an unbreakable shield. Humanity did not yield, not even when faced with total annihilation. Lieutenant Santos's voice, usually steady, trembled slightly as she delivered her report. "They're charging a sector-wide superweapon, Captain. Energy readings are off the charts. If they fire the Invictus, we won't survive." Kane's gaze hardened, his focus sharpening to a razor's edge. "Then we will prevent them from firing. We won't rely on luck. We won't use brute force. We will do this with ingenuity, with courage, with the human way." Aboard a nearby council vessel, the observer Veilshroud watched from his station, his analytical mind struggling to process what he was seeing. He had never witnessed a species confront inevitable annihilation with such complete, calculated audacity. It defied every probability, every strategic model. Humans were reckless, he knew that. But their recklessness was precise, directed, and terrifyingly effective. The Invictus, a lone human ship against a shattered but still mighty armada, began to move. It weaved through the fractured fleets, dodging concentrated volleys of plasma and laser fire. It exploited gaps that were barely there, striking exposed command links and vulnerable systems with surgical precision. Every move Kane made forced the Council to react, to falter, to make a mistake. One ship, one crew, had turned the galaxy's expectations completely inside out. Sensors locked onto the superweapon's power core, a massive, pulsating sphere of compressed energy. Its containment fields radiated lethal waves, a promise of the devastation to come. Firing it wouldn't just destroy the Invictus, it would incinerate the entire nebula, and every ship, friendly or foe, within its blast radius. Kane studied the readouts, his mind a whirlwind of calculations, noting every flaw, every flicker, every momentary vulnerability in the weapon's design. He saw his opening. "Target the containment nodes," he ordered, his voice ringing with authority. "Simultaneously fire primary and secondary cannons. Synchronize the volley with evasive thrusters. Precision is everything." The Invictus twisted through the void, its engines flaring like miniature suns as beams and torpedoes lanced outward. It was a deadly dance. Automated turrets on the superweapon exploded under the precise, focused fire. Containment nodes began to destabilize, their energy shields flickering violently. The core itself began to pulse erratically under the relentless assault. Veilshroud's antennas twitched, a physical manifestation of his disbelief. He had predicted the collapse of entire fleets, the destruction of alien fortresses, the fall of empires. But he had never, in all his calculations, foreseen the simultaneous destruction of a doomsday weapon by a single vessel navigating a kill zone. Humans were impossible. On the Invictus's engineering deck, a young officer muttered a quiet prayer under her breath, her hands trembling slightly as she recalibrated the main cannon for the final shot. "This isn't luck," she whispered to herself. "Something wanted us to survive." Kane felt it too. A subtle alignment of fate, a whisper of something beyond comprehension that seemed to guide these improbable outcomes. He didn't give it a name, didn't call it divine intervention. But he understood the sensation. It was courage, will, and audacity aligning with the universe's hidden currents, bending reality to the shape of human determination. "Fire," Kane commanded. The primary and secondary cannons fired as one. The beams of pure energy sliced through the void, striking the damaged containment nodes with perfect, synchronized timing. The energy core shuddered violently, sparks of raw power leaping across its surface like solar flares. Alarms screamed across the bridges of the Council fleets. Ships spun out of control as the weapons systems overloaded, cascading into a catastrophic failure. Veilshroud watched, his mandibles clicking in a rare display of both fear and awe, as the superweapon, the culmination of the Council's arrogance and power, exploded in a silent, blinding cascade of light and energy. Shockwaves tore through the surrounding fleets, leaving them scattered, disoriented, and utterly vulnerable. Humanity, in the form of a single ship, had stared into the abyss of annihilation and neutralized it. The Invictus weaved through the expanding debris field, its shields straining, its engines flaring, but it was intact. A collective breath of relief swept through the crew, a synchronized release of tension that had been held for what felt like an eternity. But Kane's eyes remained sharp, focused on the chaos outside. Victory wasn't a gift. It was earned, fought for, and had to be maintained. "Status report," Kane ordered, his voice cutting through the quiet aftermath. "All systems operational, Captain," Santos replied, her voice steady once more. "We have minor hull breaches, but shield fluctuations have stabilized. No casualties." The Council fleets reeled, disoriented and demoralized. Their final ultimate gambit had not just failed. It had been dismantled with contemptuous ease. One ship, one crew, one species, had turned the tide of the entire war in a matter of moments, reshaping the very definition of power. Kane looked at his crew, seeing the exhaustion in their expressions, but also an unshakable, hardened resolve. "We've survived the impossible," he said, his voice soft but resonant. "Now, we finish it." As he spoke, a subtle hum resonated through the deck plates of the Invictus. It was almost imperceptible, a faint vibration that was more felt than heard, but it was undeniable. Kane felt it, not as an intervention, not as a command, but as an alignment. Something greater, something subtle yet guiding, was threaded through their courage and ingenuity. It was in that moment that Veilshroud finally understood. With dawning, terrifying clarity, he realized that humanity's true strength wasn't their technology, or their numbers, or their military might. It was their audacity, their creativity, their indomitable will to defy the odds. And perhaps, just perhaps, that strength was touched by the faint, rhythmic pulse of the universe itself, a force that aligned improbable outcomes with sheer human courage. The Invictus turned to face the remaining Council fleets, its engines flaring to life, its shields shimmering with renewed power. Humanity had survived annihilation. Humanity had prevailed against impossible odds, and humanity would fight again, with courage, ingenuity, and a quiet faith woven into every single action. The war wasn't over, but the end was now in sight. The nebula stretched out like a molten canvas of fire and shadow, reflecting the aftermath of a war no one expected to end this way. The Council fleets, once symbols of unbreakable power, now lay shattered, their command structures annihilated, their arrogance undone by a single human ship. Yet the Invictus did not slow. Victory was not a destination, it was a prelude to survival. For centuries, the galaxy had looked down on humanity. Today, that changed forever. Captain Elias Kane stood at the helm, his eyes scanning the fractured enemy lines. He could feel the weight of history in this moment. The alien assumptions, the condescending glances, the dismissal of an entire species, all of it had just collapsed in a single brilliant flash of defiance. One ship, one crew, one species had just rewritten the future of a galactic war. But Kane knew the final strike required more than force. It demanded precision, courage, and that spark of ingenuity that only humans seem to possess. Lieutenant Santos's voice broke the tense silence. The remaining command vessels are converging, Captain. If they unite, they could re-establish control. But they're slow. They're vulnerable. Kane's lips pressed into a thin line. He wasn't just fighting a battle, he was carving a message into the stars. Then we act before they can regroup. We end this, not with destruction alone, but with strategy, and with what makes us human. Miles away, in the shattered council chambers, the ancient observer Veilshroud had grown silent. He had witnessed countless civilizations rise and fall, each following a predictable arc of power. But humanity was different. Their victories weren't just a product of superior technology or brute strength. Humans blended audacity, creativity, and an almost irrational faith in a way that seemed to reshape reality itself. They didn't just break the rules, they created new ones as they went. The Invictus moved like a predator through the wreckage, weaving between drifting hulks and the glittering detritus of battle. The alien vessels fired blindly, their attacks desperate and uncoordinated. Shields flared around the human ship, and enemy hulls exploded, but Kane's crew remained unshaken. Every maneuver, every shot, was precise, deliberate, and utterly unpredictable. A deadly choreography born of instinct, experience, and an unwavering will to live. "Prepare the final salvo," Kane ordered, his voice calm but resonant with authority. "Target their command nexus directly. Synchronize all weapons with evasive vectors. I want every system at maximum efficiency." The ship hummed as its main cannon charged, energy building to a pulse that could obliterate the largest dreadnought in the galaxy. Secondary weapons locked onto their targets with surgical precision, ready to exploit every opening created by the initial strike. Veilshroud's antennas twitched with disbelief. He whispered to his ancient archives, "They are not just winning. They are transcending expectation. One ship, one species, one will, and yet they command the battlefield as if they were 1,000. Then, the Invictus fired. The main beam lanced through the blackness of space, a spear of pure energy striking the core of the largest remaining command vessel. A ripple of catastrophic energy tore the ship apart from the inside out. Instantly, the secondary cannons followed in perfect coordination, cutting down the escort ships with unerring accuracy. The Council's remaining forces scattered, disoriented and broken, unable to mount any coherent response. The battle was over. On the bridge, the crew allowed themselves a single, collective breath. They had survived annihilation, breached the enemy's heart, and delivered the final, decisive strike. But Kane's gaze remained sharp, his senses on high alert. He knew victory was as much a matter of will and courage as it was of firepower. And in that quiet moment, a subtle hum passed through the ship, a faint vibration that was more than just machinery. Kane felt it, the same strange alignment of forces that had guided them through every impossibility, a silent pulse weaving courage, ingenuity, and faith into the fabric of reality itself. A young engineer whispered, almost in awe, "That wasn't just luck. It feels like something wanted us to survive." Kane didn't respond, but he felt the truth in those words. Humanity had faced impossible odds before, back on a small blue planet in a forgotten corner of the galaxy. And now, in the heart of a vast empire, they had proved that courage, will, and a touch of madness could outmatch any calculation. Veilshroud, watching from afar, finally understood. Humanity's strength was never about numbers or technology. It was a force of creation, of audacity, of an unyielding spirit that refused to be measured by conventional means. In their hands, even the impossible became just another obstacle to overcome. The Invictus turned slowly, its running lights illuminating the silent graveyard of a fallen empire. The galaxy had underestimated them. It had scorned them. But humanity had endured. Humanity had triumphed. And in every explosion, every impossible maneuver, every quiet prayer whispered beneath the hum of the ship, the essence of human defiance had been made clear for all to see. Kane spoke softly to his crew, his voice carrying the weight of history and the promise of a new future. "We are not defined by numbers. We are not defined by their technology. We are defined by our courage, our will, and our absolute refusal to yield. The galaxy has learned that now. In the cold void, as the Invictus sailed past shattered ships and drifting debris, a subtle sense of order began to thread through the chaos. Perhaps it was chance. Perhaps it was fate. Or maybe, just maybe, it was the quiet hand of something greater, guiding the improbable, bending the arc of survival toward victory. Veilshroud recorded his final report, a rare tone of reverence in his synthesized voice. One ship, one species, one will, and yet the universe itself seems to bend to their courage. The humans aboard the Invictus did not celebrate with loud cheers. Their victory was tempered by the cost, by the heavy knowledge that the galaxy was vast, dangerous, and full of challenges yet unseen. But in the quiet hum of the engines, in the steady rhythm of shields and weapons systems, there was triumph. Audacity had prevailed. Courage had reshaped expectation. Humanity had proven that even the smallest number could change the fate of the stars. And somewhere, in the quiet glow of the nebula and the vastness of space, Cain whispered to the universe, a promise and a warning in one. We are humanity. We do not yield, and we will always endure. The galaxy had laughed at humanity's one ship. It would never laugh again.